On April 2, 2024, General Electric finalized a corporate breakup into 3 separate pieces. After 111 continuous years on the Dow Jones Industrial Average, the company as a single entity ceased to exist. For most of the 20th century, GE was the defining American industrial powerhouse. They employed hundreds of thousands of people who manufactured tangible things, turbines, jet engines, consumer appliances, creating physical value from raw materials. Then in 1981, Jack Welch took over as CEO. He was a fiercely competitive chemical engineer from Massachusetts who carried a deep hatred for the company's bloated, slow-moving bureaucracy. 4 months into the job, Welch stood in front of a room of Wall Street analysts and made a promise. GE was no longer going to follow the broader economy like a caboose. They were going to be the locomotive pulling it. Over the next 20 years, Welch wrote a management playbook that Wall Street treated as gospel. He was eventually crowned Manager of the Century by Fortune magazine. Yet the exact structural changes he implemented to earn that title are the identical mechanisms that left his empire in pieces. The first tool in Welch's playbook came from a management consultant named Peter Drucker, who proposed the idea of abandonment theory. Welch turned this into a rigid corporate mandate. Every single business unit inside GE had to be number 1 or number 2 in its respective market. If it wasn't, it would be fixed, sold off, or shut down entirely. Divisions that had defined the GE brand for generations were immediately placed on the chopping block. The massive mining acquisition, Utah International, was sold off. The central air conditioning division was handed to Trane. Even the housewares division, the team making the irons and toasters that sat in millions of American kitchens, was sold to Black & Decker. Here is what that efficiency mandate looks like on a chart. Between 1981 and 1985, GE's global headcount plummeted. The company went from employing 411,000 people to 299,000. That equates to 112,000 jobs erased in just 4 years. The remaining workers gave him a nickname after the Neutron bomb, calling him Neutron Jack, because he killed the people but left the building standing. But Wall Street loved it. Prior to Welch, mass layoffs were heavily stigmatized as a sign of corporate failure. Welch convinced the market that slashing a workforce was actually proof of decisive, strong leadership. To extract maximum output from the survivors of those cuts, Welch built a 52-acre leadership academy in New York called Crotonville. He poured millions into the campus, creating an ideological training ground to drill his management principles into the executives who remained. This bell curve visualizes his core personnel system, the vitality curve. Inside GE, it was known as Session C, but everyone else called it rank and yank. Managers were forced to categorize their entire workforce into 3 rigid tiers: an elite top 20%, a developing middle 70%, and a bottom 10%. Every single year, the people caught in that bottom 10% were fired. Welch believed that any manager who refused to tell employees exactly where they ranked was a coward. For the top tiers, Welch imposed a rigid statistical quality control program called Six Sigma. He made the training mandatory for a hierarchy of green belts and black belts. When survival depends on outperforming the person in the next cubicle, the incentive to collaborate vanishes. In annual reviews, managers were forced to debate which of their high performers to sacrifice just to satisfy the math of the 10% out rule. This turned every office into a zero-sum game, where helping a colleague meant risking your own ranking. While the industrial side of the company was being squeezed, the true growth engine of the Welch era was a division called GE Capital. Over time, GE drifted away from building physical machines, operating like an unregulated shadow bank, financing everything from commercial real estate to credit cards. Fueled by this financial arm, GE went on a massive shopping spree. Before Welch retired, the company acquired roughly 600 separate businesses, spending the equivalent of $130 million every single week for 2 decades. Look at this line chart mapping GE's quarterly earnings. It points upward with impossible smoothness. Former executives later admitted they treated GE Capital's massive real estate portfolio as a honeypot. If the industrial side missed a quarterly target, they simply sold a building or 2 to plug the gap and hit Wall Street's expectation exactly. Hitting the penny on earnings for over 100 consecutive quarters paid off. By the summer of 2000, GE's market capitalization climbed to nearly $600 billion. They briefly traded places with Microsoft as the most valuable company on Earth. By the end of the Welch era, GE had inverted the traditional logic of industry. The factories and jet engines now functioned as raw materials, manufacturing the only product that truly mattered to the board, a rising stock price. Welch stepped down in September 2001, securing a retirement package valued at $417 million. It included a luxury apartment on Central Park West, country club memberships, and unlimited access to a corporate Boeing 737. He cashed out right before the economic reality caught up with the balance sheet. When the financial crisis hit in 2008, the credit markets froze. GE Capital, relying entirely on highly leveraged short-term overnight debt, suddenly found itself unable to roll over its obligations. The financial engine stalled out. To avoid bankruptcy, GE cut its dividend from 30 cents down to 10 cents. They were forced to accept a $139 billion backstop from the FDIC and Federal Reserve, alongside an emergency $3 billion rescue investment from investor Warren Buffett. The stock entered a 15-year downward spiral. Welch's hand-picked successor, Jeff Immelt, sold off NBC, the plastics division, and the appliance division before being forced out by an activist investor. GE cycled through multiple CEOs until it was finally booted for the Dow Jones Index in 2018. A corporate structure entirely optimized to manipulate quarterly earnings reports lacks the actual foundation needed to survive a genuine systemic stress test. When the market crashed, GE had nothing solid left to stand on. While GE broke apart, the ideas Jack Welch codified did not die with the company. The executives trained in Crotonville's pit dispersed across the American corporate landscape, taking the playbook with them to 3M, Chrysler, Home Depot, and Honeywell. When Welch disciple Jim McNerney took over Boeing, he faced a choice in 2011: invest billions in a brand new clean sheet airplane or mount new engines on a 50-year-old 737 frame to save money. He chose the shortcut to protect quarterly margins, a decision that produced the unstable flight characteristics and engineering compromises behind the 737 MAX crashes. When Welch was a kid, his mother scolded him after he threw his hockey stick in frustration over a loss. She told him, "If you don't know how to lose, you'll never know how to win." Welch spent 20 years refusing to ever accept a bad financial quarter, moving numbers around until the loss disappeared. Squeezing an industrial base to artificially inflate a stock price generates massive personal wealth in the short term, but it guarantees decay in the long term. Jack Welch won bigger than almost any CEO of his era, but the 21st century working class is still paying the bill.